Welcome to Care Partners Compass, Navigating CRC. My name is Elsa Lankford. I am the care partner to my incredible wife, Kristine, who has stage 4 colorectal cancer. As a disclaimer, this podcast and its content is for entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by any hosts or guests on this podcast are their own personal opinions. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation. This podcast does not contain medical or legal advice. Please consult your medical professional about any medical questions or concerns. So hi, there's going to be...
Hello.
Hello. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself so that I can edit that in seamlessly.
Of course. So Elsa, thank you for having me. My name is Lora Silver, and I am a registered dietitian specializing in working within oncology and with patients going through cancer. I work at Smilow Cancer Hospital, which is the cancer center with Yale New Haven Health. I've been in this position for close to 5 years now.
Oh, wow. So how did you get into this line of work?
Well, I studied social work and Spanish and was the first few years after I went to college, I was a little more engaged in community organizations and grant writing and nonprofit work and that kind of thing. And as a young professional going to work and finding myself and often burning myself out in various jobs, I had a very personal experience around food and nutrition and activity, and just got curious about, gosh, the way I eat seems to affect how I feel when I go out for a run or how I sleep. Just noticing that connection more for myself as a young adult. And I got more and more curious and ended up discovering health coaching. It's a fascinating field, and I think it's a really important role in a healthcare team that not every hospital or medical setting necessarily has. But it's someone who doesn't actually necessarily need a whole lot of medical training and background, but is really about, helping me as the patient to actually close that gap between knowing what I need to do and actually doing it. And there can be such a gap. So I found health coaching and enjoyed working one-on-one with clients. Learned a lot about health education, and again, just what it takes to understand what motivates us and how to really change our behaviors. So that prompted me to go back into school and ultimately go back to school and study nutrition. As part of the training, I know one of the things we want to talk about is everyone uses the words nutritionist and dietitian interchangeably. What does that even mean? Well, to be a registered dietitian, which is what I am, you do have to go through more extensive training and a supervised internship where it's similar to a residency for a physician, where you circulate through all different areas of a hospital, all different specialties. Oncology was one of the areas that really interested me. So in some cases, you're getting to work with people around food, changes in their food and what they're eating and drinking. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you might be working with folks who, for a brief period of time, may need a feeding tube, may need IV nutrition, which is known as TPN. And there's a whole spectrum in between that. And oncology is one of those areas as a dietitian where you get to gain experience and work with people across that spectrum. And it's also a very meaningful area to work in because food holds such a special place in our lives, and our relationships to food and eating can be very complicated even before a cancer diagnosis. And so working in this area also gives me the opportunity to really have conversations with people around that and have more of an appreciation of that than you necessarily get to in other areas.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. When I woke up this morning, I was just kind of writing down my thoughts about food and cancer, and it's like I wrote down it can, from some illnesses, it can nurse you back to health, and even in cancer, it can to a good degree and nourishing. And there's an aspect of control that you have some control over your health.
Yes.
which with cancer there's not a lot of, but then there's definitely the negative connotation about guilt and blame. And as a care partner, I eat during stressful times, and it's like, so food is really, it is amazing how important it is, but like you said, it's also so complicated.
Yeah.
So why, and you got into this a little bit, but I've noticed with a lot of people that like their care team is all doctors, especially in colorectal cancer. It seems like having a nutritionist or a dietitian would be so important. I don't want to steal your thunder. Could you talk a little about, I mean, I'm assuming that you agree that you think it's important. So what can we do about this? Do people even know to ask?
Yeah, lots of thoughts. So no matter what state you're in, actually, you should be able to access a dietitian through your cancer center. But a lot of times they're not available on site or in person. So it may be something that's only available by request. And then also as a telehealth or by phone service. Because in some cases, you may have a dietitian that's there on site or as part of that team working with your same doctors. Or in other cases, a cancer center might partner or contract with some other service that arranges for dietitian services for you, basically. But to be as part of like the accreditation of cancer centers across the country, we do need to provide access to a registered dietitian, which is wonderful. And you're right that it's not enough of us know about it and know to ask and know to offer it. And there's a lot of issues with that. I can also share, and maybe we can include it in the show notes or something. There are some services that, again, are offered in certain regions, or in some cases are offered across the country, where no matter where you're getting your care, this is something that can be accessed separate and free. So if you have, it's great, it's ideal to go through your cancer center first, because then your dietitian is working hand in hand with your doctors, right? They can consult about your case, and I think that's really important. But if that's not available, then there are a couple options across the country that we can connect people to so that you can access that.
Yeah.
As far as why it's like this, it's probably a longer, more complicated answer, and I probably don't even know all the contributing factors to it. Unfortunately, it goes to more, root causes and healthcare system issues that we need to address. There are certain kinds of nutrition care that are covered by major insurances and reimbursable or reimbursed. And right now, medical nutrition therapy for oncology, for cancer care, is not one of those. It's not actually covered. And so the the major advantage that I can see of this current situation is that it means we're not usually billing for these services. So the benefit to the patients and families is that they don't have to, there's usually no cost associated with it, whether they have insurance or not.
Okay.
That's a benefit, but there are other trade-offs to that as a system goes. It's really unfortunate that we're in a situation, right? That, like where you're saying, it doesn't feel evident and obvious and always visible that a dietitian can be a part of the care team.
Yeah.
I'll take a step back and answer the question about, what's this difference? I hear nutritionist, I hear dietitian. So a registered dietitian is a special type of nutritionist. And it means that it's a person that has more specialized medical training and preparation to work in hospitals and to work with more complex diagnoses and to provide what's called medical nutrition therapy. So when I think of working with someone with a diagnosed cancer, regardless of the type of cancer, but especially with colorectal cancer and the typical treatments and surgeries and the nature of that process, I recommend working with a registered dietitian because we have that specialized training to really work with this. the term nutritionist can be used regardless of someone's training or education.
Oh, wow.
So it's one of those titles or terms that can vary wildly from state to state. So there are some people that are offering nutrition services and refer to themselves as nutritionists and are fabulous and have done lots of their own training and education to do it, but it's not required in order for them to use the term nutritionist. So that's why how you kind of have to be careful, especially when you're online and following people, right? And someone calls themselves a nutritionist. Get curious and dig deeper and understand what was their training, what are their credentials, um, what did it take for them to get that title. A registered dietitian, on the other hand, you can trust that that term, it's a legal, there's a legal definition to it.
Yeah, like an accreditation kind of thing. Okay.
Yes, yeah,
I
exactly.
had zero idea about that. I did not.
We have
Okay.
a marketing problem. It's true. It's true.
Yes. Yes. Most definitely. My goodness. Yeah, somebody needs to get on that.
Yeah. And then even more to make it even more complicated, there is so most of the dietitians that you'd work with in a cancer center or cancer hospital either have this extra credential or are probably working toward it, and it's called a certified specialist in oncology or CSO. And that just ensures that the dietitian you're working with has a more well-rounded training and exposure to many different diagnoses under the umbrella of cancer. So that's an important designation to look for too when you're seeking out a dietitian.
Okay. Oh, that's super helpful. That's super helpful. What I'm much more aware of is colorectal cancer. If we could maybe talk very generally about when somebody's diagnosed, do you have some general tips for the different kind of stages of cancer in terms of when they're about to be doing treatments, getting ready for surgery, that type of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Just general thoughts about that?
Yeah. Um, so, what we do as dietitians is really work on aspects that should improve the quality of your life. I would say it's quality of nutrition is so closely tied to quality of life, right? So when you're just starting out with treatment, and even frankly, even if before you start treatment and you're just navigating the initial visits and the workup process, right? And it can be quite overwhelming and stressful, and um, there can be a lot of emotions happening, and you can have anxiety and nerves can be a real issue in that part, even before any treatments have started, right? Um, Even in that setting, it can be helpful to have the support of nutrition services and to meet with a dietitian, because that to me is where, when we're going through a stressful period in our lives, we eat differently. We reach for different foods, we crave different things, our schedules might be completely upended and disrupted. So even then, it can help to meet with a dietitian and get some tips and tricks to help make sure we're covering our bases and eating enough to really fuel and nourish ourselves and all of that. When we're going through cancer treatments, one of the most important things is to maintain our muscle mass. It helps us to feel strong as we're going through treatment. But when we look at research on cancer treatments, and this applies for chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, all of those, when people are able to maintain their muscle mass going through those treatments, they're able to tolerate and weather the side effects of those treatments better. They really tend to have fewer side effects and better outcomes. And a lot of the better outcomes are because they're able to tolerate the full dose of treatment as prescribed. So if your radiation oncologist prescribes a certain number of sessions, if your medical oncologist prescribes a certain number, wants you to get through 6 cycles of a particular chemotherapy regimen, as dietitians, we're here to help make sure that you get through that as comfortably and as effectively as possible, and that you don't have to experience delays or holds in your treatment because of side effects. If I'm struggling too much with diarrhea, for example, which is a common side effect of so many chemotherapies, I might have to hold or delay my treatment, or potentially switch gears to a different regimen, right? So that even though the chemotherapy is causing the diarrhea, what I'm eating is not necessarily the root cause of the diarrhea. There definitely are some foods that can make that worse and aggravate it, or there's some foods that can really help it make it better, in addition to the other medications they give. So I think in the earlier stages, when you may not be facing treatment side effects, but you are facing the stress of the diagnosis and the stress of the workup process and medical visits and all of that, I think some good basic, like balanced principles of balanced nutrition would come into play. And they can sound a little boring, but they're very effective, which is one, eating fruits and vegetables. It's not going to be news to anybody, I promise. But I'm telling you, there are really protective compounds in fruits and vegetables. They really are protective for our immune system. And so it makes a difference when you're including those on a regular basis in your daily and weekly rotation. If you're including those as a regular part of your diet, it's really a protective thing to do for yourself and for your immune system. And that gives you a good foundation going into whatever's next. And when I say like regular fruits and vegetables, I'm thinking, trying for at least 2 or 3 servings of fruit a day and at least 2 or 3 servings of vegetables a day. There's ongoing research about what the best number of servings of fruits and vegetables and which foods are the very best. But really, at the end of the day, the more variety, the better, and the more colorful plant, fruits and vegetables that agree with you and that you feel good when you eat and that you like, the better. But really, fruits and vegetables during that early stage, it's important and that matters. Good for all of us for a variety of reasons, for a variety of chronic conditions, but there's a lot of protective compounds in there that help for this. Um, and then I also think about protein. You may not need crazy high amounts of protein, but um, but we do want to make sure that you're getting enough protein to maintain your muscle mass and to maintain your weight. It's not great if you're about to go into surgery or you're about to start a treatment regimen and you are you're going through a phase where you've been continually unintentionally losing weight without trying, or if you've been losing a lot of muscle mass recently, right, and struggling with a lot of weakness and fatigue and really not eating well. It's not a great foundation going into treatments. There's a lot of different ways that you can think about how to get enough protein. Meeting with a dietitian can really help to personalize the goals for that, right? But a quick way to do it can be to take your weight in pounds and divide that in half. And the number you're left with is about the number of grams of protein that you should aim for a whole day. So, for example, if I weigh 150 pounds, divide that by 2 and I get 75. So I'm looking at a goal of about 75 grams of protein a day. Some people might benefit from more depending on how active they are or if certain treatments have started and that can increase your needs a little bit, but that's a really good start. And then the other thing, especially thinking about surgery, so I work with a lot of folks going through, before and after major surgery for their cancer. And when I think about giving yourself a good foundation going into that, I think about actually practicing some of the eating habits and some of the tips now before my surgery or that I know I'm going to have to do after the surgery. So, for example, if I'm heading into surgery and I know, and they've told me that I'm not going to have much of an appetite and I'm going to feel full very quickly when I eat. So right now I might be able to get away with 2 or 3 square meals a day and I'm fine. I don't really snack much in between. But they tell me after the surgery, I'm really not going to have much of an appetite and you're not going to be able to eat full meals. You're going to have to snack throughout the day. You're going to have smaller meals but eat more often. It's actually a really good idea to practice that now, even if I don't feel like I need it right now. When you practice that ahead of time, it helps you to identify what your obstacles are going to be because everyone's different. But for some of us, just the idea of snacking in between can feel so unfamiliar. And depending on what our lifestyles and schedules are like and what our family lives are like, it can help you to identify some of the obstacles that are going to come up after surgery and help you work through those and chat about it with the dietitian now, chat about it with your healthcare team now, so that you can come up with solutions so that you're actually more prepared to follow through with that after surgery. Another thing that's true, I think, with a lot of these GI related surgeries, um, is that, chewing your food really well and pacing yourself at meals tends to make everything about eating more comfortable and pleasant after surgery. But if you it's very common for a lot of us to scarf down our meals and not chew enough. Yeah, a lot of us do not chew well enough. Easier said than done. But if you know that that's something you really have never had to think about before and are not familiar with, it can help so much to practice that habit now before your surgery, before you actually need to. Because otherwise, it can be kind of too much to be practicing all of these new habits for the first time and be dealing with the post-op or post-surgery fatigue and possibly some pain and possibly some side effects. It's a lot, right?
And I'm just thinking from a care partner's point of view, also those could be helpful tips for a care partner to help their loved one get
Mm,
into that frame of mind as well.
yes, yes. Yeah, and if you can stand it, actually practicing it along with them, because we're
Yes,
very social,
that's true.
and we really do. We mirror each other, right? Like if we're sitting down and the person beside us is putting their fork down between each bite to help themselves chew more, that like seeing that can actually help me do the same. If I'm watching someone do that, you don't want to make yourself crazy doing stuff like that, but sometimes it's just making it more, making changes and trying on new habits as a team, as a family, can really help.
Yeah,
Be a supportive thing
I think that chewing more can. There's a lot of benefit to that for
to do. There is.
care partners as well. I say that, yes. Yeah, no, that's cool. And what about survivorship for
Mhm.
people that are maybe they're done with treatment or they're getting to like maintenance treatment. It seems like that's still helpful to have a dietitian to be able to talk to.
Yeah, I think so. There's and again, I know where I am, we have some programming and services available where we can help put together, just like you said, maintenance or survivorship plans for you. Um, Fortunately, a lot of the nutrition advice that applies for prevention of cancer also applies for reducing risk of recurrence
Hmm.
and for those survivorship recommendations and guidelines. So it's good in that if you've already learned or you've already been familiar with some of the nutrition tips for preventing cancer, it's really those same lifestyle habits and eating practices. So it really, um, so for example, having a diet that's um, overall good emphasis on fruits and vegetables and whole grains and getting protein from plant-based foods. Those recommendations are pretty solid. It's interesting. On one hand, there's always research ongoing in the area of nutrition and cancer. There's still so much we don't know and that we have to learn. And at the same time, there are some basic findings that we are coming back to again and again and do seem to be pretty strong base of evidence for them. And lots of compelling findings there, but they're very basic. I think a lot of times they're not as well publicized. They're not as attractive to fit into headlines. I mean, the whole fruits and vegetables thing. There's a lot of power and solid research to suggest that the more servings a day that we're getting of fruits and vegetables, there's significant protection against cancer and a variety of other chronic conditions. It's still not a guarantee. There's a lot of factors that go into a diagnosis of cancer. Unfortunately, I wish we knew a lot. There's a lot we're still figuring out about that.
Yeah.
Um, but there is still good evidence for it as far as protecting us from the initial diagnosis of cancer and then also reducing risk of recurrence.
As a dietitian, what are reliable sources of information that a regular person could use? We've definitely sold people on getting a dietitian on the care team. That's checked off. But people mean well, but it can be really misleading, it seems.
Yes. There's a lot of misinformation, myths, and I think it can be very scary and complex. It's a big topic. It's a big problem, I think, in this area. My favorite resources to recommend, number one, would be the American Institute for Cancer Research. It goes by the acronym AICR. So their website is aicr.org.
Okay.
And they are a wealth of information when it comes to nutrition and cancer. So they have areas where you can dive in, and perhaps as a care partner, you might have a little more bandwidth to dive into that research, right? And really look at some of that more detailed information in the latest studies. But they also have higher level pages that you can go to. For example, if I want to know more about oats, are oats good for my type of cancer, or is it a good food or a bad food? They have parts of their website where you can look up the therapeutic benefits of specific foods.
Oh.
And you can get quick answers, and everything is actually based on evidence. And I think it's a really good, understandable website for all of us to be using. So the American Institute for Cancer Research, they also share lots of good recipes and meal ideas. So anything that combines actual recipes with the science, yes. I'm always a fan of, right? Because we're always looking for that.
Yeah.
So I like that resource. And then I also like, especially if you're going through treatments or recovering from a big surgery, there's another website called Cook for Your Life. And this is much more recipe focused, but you can filter and search recipes by a lot of different things. So for example, you can look for recipes that are good for if I'm experiencing nausea and diarrhea. And it will filter all the recipes and show me specific beverage ideas, snack ideas, meal ideas.
Wow.
That are recommended to help me manage that. Yeah.
I'm 4 years in and I have not used either of these resources. I feel, boy, okay. I'm learning.
Always learning.
I learned so much from Lora that there's actually enough to do a second episode on nutrition and cancer. And in that episode, we're going to talk about specific foods that can be helpful, including about inflammation. So I hope that you join us for that episode as well. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Care Partners Compass, Navigating CRC. If you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, you know exactly when the next episode comes out. I hope that you'll share the podcast with your friends and family. The transcript of Care Partners Compass, Navigating CRC, and additional links can be found on our website, carepartnerscompass.transistor.fm.